Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is Rihanna from Black Mental Health Matters. Today, we are going to be joined by three wonderful guests, and we're going to be discussing the emotional and spiritual aspects that impact chronic illnesses and the impact that this has on mental health as well. So, stay tuned. I'll introduce our guests to you very, very shortly. And be sure to have a pen and paper handy so that way you can take some notes of this very edifying conversation. Again, this is Rihanna from Black Mental Health Matters, which is a show all about giving information to the Black communities around all different subjects that impact our mental health as a Black community. So make sure that you check out our other shows and stay tuned for today's show. Okay. So we are back. We are back. And we are going to introduce our first guest. So we will welcome Vanessa. Vanessa is a certified spiritual healer and coach who uses trauma informed practices to help people heal from the trauma and stress that they are enduring. She is a member of the International Association of Therapists and an accredited training provider. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Good, good, good. So as I've just given a bit of a description of who you are and what you do, please grace the viewers and just a bit more information about what exactly a certified spiritual healer is and how you help people.
Yeah. You could think of me as like a spiritual counselor. I refer to myself as just like a healer and nurturer. So, really, my role is to help people overcome trauma and stress by using trauma informed spiritual care. Trauma
Mhm,
informed, meaning that I understand just how pervasive trauma is in our world today. And
mhm,
so, I help guide and lead people towards therapies, environments that are focused on supporting recovery as opposed to things that may inadvertently re-traumatize them. So this is very, personal and individualized. And so one of the things that I want to share with people that really helped me through my mental health challenges as well as like physical health challenges is just how to tap back into our ancestral spiritual practices as a way of overcoming trauma, stress, and other mental health issues. So I'm not here to push any one particular form of spirituality, just really
Mhm.
here to inspire people to connect with their spiritual selves.
Lovely, lovely, amazing. So, as you can see, viewers, you can see where we have Vanessa here with us today. Thank you. So, sit back and I'll introduce our next guest, which is Marcia. So, viewers, if you watched our show last week, you'll know Marcia, but I'll introduce her again because she deserves all of that sauce. So, Marcia has developed a lot of skills, knowledge, and experience working with the EDI field, particularly over 30 years, where she has done mentoring, coaching, training, and facilitation within the police force and beyond. So we are going to introduce Marcia to the stage. Welcome, Marcia.
Hi Rihanna. Hi, Vanessa.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good, good, good. So, like I said, I know the viewers may have seen you last week, but those of the viewers that haven't, please introduce yourself and give them a bit about what you do.
Well, as you said, I focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Police officer for 30 years, and that's how I started my journey in terms of equality, inclusion. As it refers to the topic we're talking about, I was a Reiki master. I trained as a Reiki master and practiced for a number of years. Also, EMT, eye movement therapy, which I don't do now. So really, I suppose hopefully my contribution will be someone who's done some practicing as a professional, but also my journey in terms of spiritualism, religion, and how I've used different techniques to help me when I've had my mental ill health in terms of periods of depression.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So yeah, again, sit tight. We'll introduce our last guest, which is Naomi. So Naomi is an integrative transformational consultant and metaphysical parapsychologist. She is a creative metaphysical scientist who specializes in deep impact transformational tools to assist with the mind, body, and soul. So let's bring Naomi to the stage. Welcome, Naomi. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good, good. So, please give the viewers a bit more introduction about what you do and how you do it.
Yeah, so I am a metaphysical parapsychologist, and what I do is I bring meaning to a lot of the hidden influences that cannot be seen but can definitely be felt with impact. In the spiritual world, they identify it as spiritual experiences. In the scientific world, they may identify it as psychic phenomena or some of the influences of that. So, what I do is I'm an integrative consultant that blends both my indigenous cultural awareness of my spiritual practices with scientific awareness with conventional psychological measures, meshing it all together just to bring a much more rounded perspective of the mind, the body, and the soul.
Amazing. So, you guys are going to be for a good treat today because, yeah, we've got three amazing different perspectives coming your way. And I think to kind of kick the show off, it will be good to highlight exactly the specific terms we're referring to. And you're going to hear things like spirituality, chronic health, mental health. And I think it's really important for us to kind of kick off and define exactly what that means to each of you. So I will start with you, Vanessa. How do you define spirituality, chronic illness, and mental health, just for the viewer's sake?
Sure. So I feel like I have a pretty basic explanation or definition of what spirituality is,
Hmm.
for something that's so complex. But for me, the at the highest level, spirituality is the demonstration of awareness that you are part of something that is bigger than yourself,
Hmm.
and that everything is connected. And then from there, you can express it can be expressed in many different ways outwardly. But
Hmm.
just that knowledge alone really helps to mold and shape morals, values, and ethics. So you can tell, the degree to which somebody is spiritual just by how they show their awareness that, hey, I'm part of a part of a whole, just one part of a whole, and that
Mhm.
there's more to just me in this
Mhm.
universe, in this world. So that's, how I define spirituality in terms of how it shows up for me, how I express that. I am more into the world of energy medicine. So as Marcia was mentioning, I'm a Reiki master as well.
Mhm.
I do guided meditation, yoga, breathing, chakra healing, anything that is involves just the recognition that we are energetic beings. I personally think that religion is different, is separate and distinct from spirituality. I think religion is a way that some of us choose to outwardly express our spirituality, but that they're not necessarily synonymous. They don't mean the same thing. And so that's, an important distinction for me.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
in terms of mental health, I view that as just our ability to be psychologically and emotionally well.
Mm.
How does that show up for us in our lives? And that
Mhm.
can happen at the individual level, but also, community level, nationally, globally.
Yeah.
And then chronic illness to me is, any sort of state of dis-ease or discomfort that we experience that happens like on a recurring basis, not just one time, but it's something that we experience more than once.
Yeah. Thank you. Very well rounded. Much appreciated. And Marcia, we'll go to you next.
I'm not sure I've got much to add to Vanessa's description, certainly of
Okay.
spirituality. I mean, I believe that we're energy. We're a ball of energy as human beings, and we can feel that energy from each other,
Mhm.
and from different matter.
Mhm.
We can feel the energy in a room. That says something about us. We're not solid. And I also agree with her about spirituality and religion being different things. And as I said earlier, I've been on my own journey where I've figured out actually religion didn't work for me, but I'm a spiritual being that kind of guides my values and who I am. We are all connected. There are implications and repercussions from our actions will impact on other people, and I don't think people really understand that in terms of that whole energy vibe. We do something, it's going to have an impact on someone else, and it doesn't matter how close to us or how far away, there will be repercussions. And in terms of chronic health conditions, I think those are the ones that can be really debilitating, and they may be seen or unseen, and many of them tend not to be. People hide them, mask them, carry them, and you don't know they've actually got them, but they can really have an impact on the quality of life and
Yeah.
mental health. And we're not separate beings. We're all one. So if our physical health isn't right, then it's going to have an impact on our mental health. And perhaps maybe our mental health not being right, then we have physical health conditions, and that's a manifestation of our mental health. So I think they're interconnected.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that as well. Very well rounded. Naomi, do you have anything to add or a different definition of spirituality, mental health, and chronic illness?
Yes, from the perspective of a metaphysician, when you translate or when you bring the word spirit back to its original meaning, it comes back to the word breath or breathing, or anything that allows you to breathe or to express. If you look at the influences of the word, how the word spirit influences like inspiration or expiration. Oftentimes, when we're thinking about the breath, we're only thinking about it at the end of life or when we're fighting for our breath. But spirituality it allows us to connect to the very thing that allows us to exist, that allows us to expand, it allows us to grow in multiple different ways, whether it's personal growth, whether it's, health, physical health, peace, whatever it is that you want to be able, that you desire to attract when it comes to spirituality. So it's it's supposed to be a very simple practice that, really grounds us back into our being, but allows us to recognize that we are divine beings and we have divinity that can connect us to much more expansive experiences, and those that also means that we can be susceptible to um, uh, extra dimensional or interdimensional influences that we may not be able to see. And that translates into chronic illness, because, and I agree with the definitions that have been stated already, in terms of the dis-ease or the discomfort that someone experiences in that moment. But it's also, I think we also need to expand our awareness of illnesses, because not all illnesses are actually diseases. A disease is something where the organism has malfunctioned, right? An illness is where there's a temporary influence that's taken place that can be remedied, and I think that's uh, a lot more comforting perspective to have when it comes to our health, because it allows us to recognize that there are there is even diversity within illness and how it can be experienced and how we can navigate ourselves towards health.
Mm. Like different degrees of illness. Is that what you mean by
Yeah.
that? Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think, you've all kind of touched a bit upon the connections between the three. And I think it's very important to understand not only how they relate to each other, but how they are disconnected from each other. But I think one of the things that I would like to hear more about is how does it manifest within the body when you have a poor spiritual practice or poor emotional hygiene practice? How does that manifest as ill mental health or ill physical health? And this question is to Vanessa.
Yeah, so as has already been stated, we kind of have three different aspects of self: mind, body, and spirit. And when one is imbalanced, it can be, felt in the other two. And I think, examples, there's more like noticeable examples of this, like when somebody is diagnosed with an illness or disease, oftentimes it impacts their mental health, right? Their outlook, they may experience anxiety and depression along with the physical disease that they've been diagnosed with. That then could impact their spiritual health in terms of maybe they might feel a sense of hopelessness or questioning the purpose of their life. Or some people may experience a sense of spiritual awakening because of this, where they kind of have something right in front of them that forces them to take stock of their life and sort of assess, what am I doing here? What's my purpose? How do I fit into this greater, big puzzle that I'm a part of? But I think some things that we're more familiar with is like trauma, right? So that can be mental and physical as well. So a lot of studies show that people who experience trauma have increased likelihood to have chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart conditions, cancer, and it's also the leading cause of like death, of a form of death, which is suicide. So we see we can see I think the connection with trauma more explicitly with things like mental and physical health, but what tends to get overlooked is the spiritual health aspect of it. And how does that affect our ability to be at ease with ourselves, to express our true nature, to make wise and sound decisions, knowing that we are part of a greater whole. And, just as somebody who has experienced, trauma, it has a huge impact on that. You do feel a little hopeless, resigned. You can grow to be numb and just kind of check out. You just disconnect from yourself and others around you. And I think that's behind what we see a lot, or what we're hearing and seeing a lot of today, is a lot of spiritual disease, spiritual unrest. We've been in a spiritual crisis for like centuries now, and you can see it. That's why, there's so much unrest, because we have not been allowed to be our true selves and attend to our spiritual care. So to me, it's like very obvious the connections there, but those are a few that come out to mind.
Thank you for that. Any others to add, Marcia or Naomi? Anything else to add to that?
Yes. So you can either, I look at it in two different ways. In terms of the influences, you can have the influence of trauma, in terms of the manifestation of chronic illness, or it could be the sequencing of actions, what actions you take or don't take. That can also influence a chronic illness, for example. And a lot of this will also have a spiritual influence, because it will tie back genetically with eating patterns, or different emotional responses to things that creates a particular reaction, and can create illness in a person. So an example would be diabetes. That's something that is hereditary and can travel through the line. But when we don't do the right things in terms of eating the right things, choosing, making the right decisions when it comes to, our sugar intake and things like that, that's going to create a particular type of illness. But yes, trauma also is an influence. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And so the body is holding the record of every single experience that we've gone through. The liver, the pancreas, the heart, the nervous system, all of these different parts of ourselves are going to be having some type of reaction to whatever type of traumatic event would have taken place. And so now it opens up a spectrum of conditions that can be spiritually influenced, mentally influenced, and physically influenced. Now, the question from a metaphysical angle would be, sometimes it's like, what is the actual cause? Is it the body? Is it the mind? Or is it the spirit? It could be either or at any time. And so this is why, even when we speak about care options, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a immediate diagnose, this is what you have, this is what you don't have, because it's so diverse, and you have to really be thorough in your investigation and how you're connecting some of the parallels. From a perspective of from metaphysics, we see everything is interconnected. We say, as above, so below, as within, so without. So there's always going to have some level of parallel effect on if there's a physical influence, there's going to be a mental and a spiritual parallel that's going to come in. And we have to begin to see things from a holistic perspective, because if we only tackle one side, you still got the other side that's still there, that hasn't been tackled. And so that's not it's not going to be as an effective approach, because you're not dealing with it in a holistic way. So
yeah, that's important. Thank you for that. And I think a lot of what you've both explained it makes sense to me, and that's more because I'm learning a bit more about the aspects of ill health, but also understanding how things manifest in the body, how trauma is trapped in the body as well. But for people that this is new concepts to them, and they're not too sure exactly what to look out for, because some of the symptoms of, say, a spiritual awakening can mirror the symptoms of poor physical health. So how do you know which is which, and how do you know when to go for, say, an examination at the doctor's, or come and see a spiritual counselor? And this question will be to you, Marcia.
That's a difficult one, because each person is unique, and therefore illnesses will, despite what textbooks will say, will manifest themselves differently in different people. So that I think is the challenge. I think also what is a challenge is as well, we've been what's the right word? We have been programmed when we're not feeling well to automatically go and see a doctor to give us a tablet. We might not actually reflect on what it is in our environment that might be impacting on our health, be it physical or psychological. It's about a quick fix, and something we touched on last week. Because more often than not, unless you trip over something and break your leg, some other diseases have and illnesses have taken time to build up in your body. And actually, I think as human beings, we know when we're not right, and what we tend to do is to ignore the symptoms when we're not right, push it to one side. Sometimes because we're frightened of what might be going on, and other times because we have a tendency to tell people when they're not feeling well, especially when it's to do with their mental health, pull yourself together. It's all in your mind. Well, yeah, it's in your mind, but it will manifest itself in your body as well. So I think it's a really difficult one to separate out, and I actually don't think it's helpful to separate it out. I agree with what Naomi said. When someone's ill, we shouldn't just be dealing with the physical. We should be dealing with the other aspects, because they're a whole human being, not just that bit that presents themselves. If they've broken their ankle, then it's going to have an aspect on their mental health. And people don't make that connection, because if they're not mobile, they can't work. It's going to build up stress and all the rest of it. And we don't even touch on the spiritual aspect at all. So I can't give a solution because I think it's complex.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, even just throwing the question out, it makes me think that how would anyone really know how to tell the difference, because they are so interconnected. But any other thoughts or feelings about this, Vanessa, Naomi?
If I just want to add another thing as well.
Yeah,
that
sure, go ahead.
In terms of medical diagnosis and how medics are trained, they're not trained to take into account other people's aspects. They're not even they're not even trained to take into account cultural differences. The medical books don't take into account black skin, the black experience. So if they can't do that, and that's physical, how they're going to deal with the other aspects of an individual.
Yeah, that's very true. And I remember when we was prepping for this show, I can't remember who made the comment, but we was talking about having, a spiritual assessment, I guess, alongside the mental health assessments and the physical health assessments. So I agree that that's something that could be a way of understanding the whole person, rather than just parts of a person. So yeah,
I would
go
add
ahead.
into that as well. Yeah, it is important to have that integrative aspect, because so first, before I even get into that, let me identify the differences between the being in a what they identify as psychotic state, as opposed to going through what is identified as a spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency. So it is very difficult to identify the two, but I'm going to go through the framework that we use when we are identifying if someone is going through a spiritual emergency. But it's even that distinction is important, because it's not everyone that is going through an experience is going to be ill. We only see illness. We don't see the diversity of the expression. And so that's very important in itself. So it first of all, we collectively have to decolonialize and deprogram how we see people in alternative states that, you know, we don't classify as normal, right?
Yeah.
Now, when it goes to the framework that we use, we understand that there's people that can go through a breakdown, there's people that can go through what is an awakening, and there's people who can go through an initiation. These are three different stages of experiences. The one who's going through a breakdown is really going through an identity crisis that they don't know how to manage. And if we can reframe these experiences to understanding that it's a shedding of their identity, and if we can introduce more grounded cognitive frameworks that can help them understand what is actually going on, you're not actually going crazy, you're going through a transformation, you're going through a transition. And this is what introduces the whole concept of really expanding our awareness on end of life care, and really seeing it as death as something that we experience at multiple stages of life. Grief is something that we experience at multiple stages of life, and that is really what someone who's going through what they identify as psychosis is experiencing. There's a spectrum of how intense that may be, and how much cognitive awareness they have, and how much control they have over that experience. But it's not for us to judge that experience. It's actually for us to support. If they're in that state, it's us giving them the tools to help to re-regulate themselves, because that is we all have the potential to be regulated, but we have to not see it as just one state of being regulated. Someone's state of being regulated may be someone else's state of being regulated, but we're all individuals having our own unique individual experience. So when it comes to the framework that we use to identify where someone is in their experience, we ask, number one, is there a physical issue? Is there a medical issue? There was a case where a family thought that their family member had bipolar for years. When they passed away and they had a post-mortem, they actually found that they had a brain tumor that hadn't been identified. And that was the cause of what was influencing some of the hallucinations and some of the manic experiences that they were having. So it's not always the influence of the mind. Sometimes there's something else that's going on at the same time. Number two, we spoke about this earlier. Is there past trauma? Do they need therapy? Do they need to process something that has just erupted, and they have no ability to understand what's going on? Number three, is there social issues that are taking place? Prejudice, poverty. We see what's happening with the racism, and just the sensitivities surrounding even being a Black person in this day and age, and the trauma that erects right now. Is that an influence? Their environment, their physical, where they're living, is that an influence? Can they form trusting relationships? They may be in a very temporary moment where they're just, I don't know where I am. Okay, so now let's introduce something that can help you understand. But if they can form a trusting relationship, that doesn't mean to say that they are ill. It means that they are in distress. The next one is, are they receptive to a new cognitive framework? So when you're working with them, are they receptive to a cognitive framework that is an alternative perspective that can help them better understand their experience, from a more transpersonal angle? And then the last one is communication. Is their communication understandable? Now, this is an important one, because we can also judge people very harshly in how they're communicating, but people individually can have their own cognitive framework that we may not have a reference point for. That doesn't mean to say that they're not communicating well. That means that you don't have reference point of what they're communicating. So that's why the whole integrative care is important, because it allows for more diverse awareness of what's actually going on. You may not understand some of the spiritual nuances and how that can play out, or some of the experiences that they're having, but someone can come in and bring more clarity from that angle. So that's what we use as spiritual emergence coaches, to identify where someone is. And we wouldn't, when we do that, when we do this, and there's actually if you look into the spiritist movements, not spiritual, spiritists in Brazil, they actually have spiritist psychiatric hospitals and places where they use these methods themselves, but some of the ones that are some of the hospitals that are coming out, they are using more of a collaborative approach, that it's allowing the holistic approach to be first before you go and offer any type of medication, but you allow the patient to guide the process. They choose whether they want the medication or if they want to just have a holistic experience, but they're just holding a space for that. So yeah, that's just a little bit of breaking down of that angle.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and I think it's nice to know that there is a way to make this distinction in such clear sequential manners as well, because I think that's very important. Is there anything else anyone would like to add to that question before
I'd like to just jump onto what Naomi was saying, because I think what she was describing is probably like the ideal state of what we would all experience. We would go to a care provider and then be asked questions from a holistic manner. But unfortunately, that's not the state of healthcare. At least that's not widely available to everyone today. So, I guess my advice to somebody who's kind of struggling with like, is this a spiritual awakening, or am I having like a mental health episode, or is this like physical? Is unfortunately right now, a lot of the burden's going to have to be on you to ensure that you get that holistic care, unless you're fortunate enough to have access to somebody like Naomi and other coaches using that approach. If you go directly to like a medical professional or a physical health professional or a mental health professional, they're only going to take it so far, because at least the way healthcare works in the US, they're not incented to make you well in one visit. They're incented to keep you coming back. So I think a lot of the burden, unfortunately, is going to fall on the individual and advocating for themselves. So, going back to the example Naomi shared, if somebody is experiencing like hallucinations and having other things that might present as mental health, and they go to, the doctor, and all they want to do is prescribe medication for them, they're going to be put in a position where they have to demand, like, can you run these tests? And, a piece of advice is, if you are requesting certain treatment or care and they're unwilling to give it to you, make sure they document that in your medical records. And if something magically happens when you ask them to do that, where they're now all of a sudden more open to doing things, because they don't want that liability, right? They don't want it in the record where, oh, the patient did ask us to do this stuff and we refused. So that's a little tidbit of advice, but just I guess I would say, don't settle for that initial explanation, and continue to advocate for yourself if you don't have access to like a holistic healthcare provider. And then also do some, like self-examination. If you're somebody who's been having like, stomach issues on an ongoing basis and stuff, and you've been to the doctor and they're not able to give you, clear answers, and they're just putting you on medications and stuff like that, giving you the runaround, it may be time to go ahead and seek out some sort of spiritual counselor or mental health professional to examine, are you holding and storing trauma and stress in that area? Is that what's behind your discomfort? I know people who tend to struggle with feeling safe and secure throughout their lives or at different periods in their life tend to often have a lot of lower back pain, hip pain, pelvic issues and stuff, because literally it's like we're so tense in that area at all times. We're just like, it's squeezing and clenching at all times. that oftentimes it'll just be downplayed to like an injury or something. But like I've heard examples of people having to go to pelvic floor specialists to reteach themselves how to hold those muscles in a way that is not creating that tension and stress and will relieve their pain and discomfort. So I would just encourage people that when you recognize something's not right, you know yourself best, is to go ahead and seek help. Don't wait for it to become an exacerbated issue because you don't know how to necessarily categorize what you're dealing with. But just know that you may have to advocate for yourself a little bit more and not settle for just like the first explanation that is given to you. There's usually all three are usually at play. So make sure you're kind of attacking it from a tripod approach is what I like to think.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. I also think that, and it's a bit like when you're trying to lose weight, you're encouraged to keep a diary of what you're eating and consuming and all the rest of it. I think you ought to also keep a diary when you start to notice things aren't right. Start to keep a diary and documenting things as much as you can, because that will give you some information and something to look back on. There's nothing like writing something down for you to start to see, oh, okay, then there might be a connection with, diaries are great because you if you do them right, you write down things that have happened to you to the day. And if you start being a bit expanding that to actually, if anything physical happened, you can, if you have a bad day at work, I remember I was working somewhere as a police officer, and I dreaded going to work. And I remember I was supposed to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning, feeling really sick. I know when I'm not well, my stomach, for me, if I'm anxious or nervous, it's my stomach. My stomach that feels it. And I pulled up, threw up, got back in the car and went to work. That was my stress. So I agree with Vanessa, what's happening with you, but we ignore it. You need to start logging these things to see, because then you can identify potentially what your triggers are, what's going on, if there's a pattern. But we don't do that. We push it to one side and trundle on, stiff upper lip, as we're saying in the UK, trundle along until with our body and our own being screaming at us, something's not right, we carry on, and then it floors us and we're going, whoa, didn't see that coming. No, you did, you just ignored it.
Yeah, it's true. My friend calls it the intuitive nudge. If you're not going to do it, voluntarily, spirit will tell you to sit down gracefully. But it's true. And you all have spoken about, trauma and pain. And I think whilst you've kind of given ways to identify, and obviously some advice around go and see a doctor, go and see a spiritualist, go and see someone that can help you understand the experience. And what are some strategies that people can do for themselves, say maybe at home in the comfort of their own home, if they don't feel comfortable or able or even financially able to go and see someone, to go and seek some support? What are some self-help type of strategies that you can offer our viewers? I will start off with Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, I relied on a lot of self-help in my personal journey to see myself through the other side of a long period of like major depression and being diagnosed with complex or chronic post-traumatic stress. A lot of things that have helped me is meditation. So there's a lot of like different free and accessible meditation apps, YouTube videos and stuff like that. But that, to me, it provides me the time to just be at ease, to slow the information stream down, to get in contact with my physical body, to be more an observer to my thoughts and feelings. And I don't feel this like crushing sense of urgency for just that period of time. So I highly recommend mindfulness and meditation, but even things like, yoga,
Yeah.
moving the body, stretching the body, massage and stuff. And you could do this like on yourself. I know ideally we would all be, at the masseuse and getting our massages, but like you can do some like deep compression therapy on yourself and, gentle touch, whatever you feel comfortable with. That definitely helps to release any stored, tension or trauma in your bodies. I'm a huge fan of rest. And I know that's a luxury and privilege these days. So I recognize that. But resting comes in many forms. So you have the more like known form of rest, which is like sleeping or napping. Absolutely huge fan of that. I think to what Naomi mentioned earlier, a lot of us have to decolonize our view around work ethic and laziness and what that really means. I mean, we've proven time and time again, we're hard workers. We don't have anything more to prove around that. So we are deserving of rest. And so how do you let go of feelings of guilt around resting? Because, you do deserve that. But there's also rest in terms of, having people that you can be your authentic self around. You don't have to wear your masks and stuff and people please and stuff. You could be you, and that there's no fear of, negative consequences. So making sure you have people in your life like that, whether they're around you physically, or the great thing about technology is now we're able to make connections over distance too.
Yes.
So make sure you have those people in your lives. There's creative rest. So how are you expressing yourself creatively? I don't consider myself an artist, but I do enjoy like painting. I don't share it with the world, but it is a release.
Even if it's just for you.
Yeah, exactly. So don't think you have to be like a Picasso or anything, but I'm also another form of creativity that's really good for me is problem solving. So if you like puzzles, things like that, just making sure you're attending to all aspects of self as well. And then there's like sensory rest. I mean, so just I'm a huge proponent of just resting and just being in your natural state as much as you possibly can, while recognizing the confines and restrictions that we're all living under. Just making sure that you are centering yourself and you're doing what you need in order to show up fully each day.
Yeah. Amazing. Some great strategies there. I hope you're all writing this down. Make sure that you go back and rewind and write this down. Any more strategies, Marcia?
I think for me, my go-to place is music. I love music.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's classical and it's being still and just listening, and other times Bob's hitting the decks or there's a bit of Aretha and I'm singing. It's music for me. So it's about what do I need at that time, and there was a song that I would play repeatedly 2 hours once when I was having a stressful time at work. It was a Beverly Knight song, and the lyrics just worked for me because it just prepared me for the environment. It just prepared me. So music, I'm one of these people, my brain's always going, I can be really hyperactive. So for me to sit and do nothing and not be constantly thinking about something or the next project or the next thing to do is something that I've had to learn to calm myself. When I'm sometimes when I'm stressed, I get manic. I start worrying about things and I start doing lots of things. And other things as well is sometimes slow me down. I'll do some cleaning. I'll clean from top to bottom, whether it needs cleaning or not, because I need to do something physical. So for me, it's a question for everybody, I would say. Find out what works for you, and it's trial and error sometimes. Find out what gives you joy. And it might be that you go back to being a bit of a child again. And Vanessa, when I was going through my period of depression, I painted like Billy-O. I had canvases, I had the whole thing. And I just painted whatever I felt like it. And I tell you what, it was no Picasso, but it was really freeing and liberating, not to be constrained by it needs to look like this. It can look like whatever I want it to look like.
Yeah.
So it's about finding what works for you. And there can be some fun and joy in that, because what you're doing then is you're focusing on you. And we spend so little time in our busy lives focusing on what we need and our needs. That's an experiment in itself. For the next week, I'll try this. For the next week, I'll try that, and find out what works. It won't be just one thing. It'll be a number of things, depending on what you need at the time. So you find yourself a menu of what works for you in whatever state that you need it to work for, and you go, I need that today.
I like that, the way you phrased it. Find yourself a menu, because it's like tapas, having a bit of everything and enjoying it, being refilled and renewed by it. So yeah, I like that analogy. Thank you. Naomi, anything more to add? What works for you, and what advice can you give to our viewers?
Oh, the creative expression is so major. I had a similar experience in Marcia when I was going through my transitionary experience, and I'm not Picasso either, but I do a lot of creative trances. And when I enter these trances, I become Picasso somehow. And I literally filled my wall, and this is when I was in university. I literally filled my wall with all of these different paintings, and I was like, I'm going to create my own vibration to surround myself with, create my own intention. And so I did a lot of that. And I think one of the biggest things is just really learning to honor that creative flow again, because we're always in go mode, we're always in do mode. Like Marcia was saying, coming back and honoring the inner child again, and really honoring how the inner child desires to express itself, which may be very other people may not be able to understand that, because they're expecting you to be the adult, they're expecting you to fall in line and still be doing your 1 2 3. But sometimes we kind of need to break that loop and just coming that flow, and really just honor wherever our heart desires to flow in the moment. When we skip and we try to push it and we repress it, we actually create more issues for ourselves when we do that. Another thing is dance. Now tension is often trapped a lot in the hips, and particularly for women as well. We have a lot of trauma in the hips, and so just movement, sensual movement, has been so healing for me. Just going in and just moving around, and just allowing myself to flow, and also switching my perspective to trauma. Because if we can understand trauma is actually tension, just like when you get a massage, you can actually massage it out, you can stretch it out, you can do something that can alleviate the tension. Sometimes when we only see it as trauma, it's like, oh my god, this can't go anywhere. Right? But there's
Like it's
exercises
stagnant.
like, right, it's all stagnant. But there's yoga, there's tension trauma release exercises that I really, really recommend. That's been so beneficial for me dealing with psychosomatic trauma. That has I started to feel it just hovering over my skin. That's probably another thing to do of psychosomatic trauma. But the also flower essences. I don't hear a lot of talk about flower essences, bark remedies. That has been my most impactful modality, along with the trauma release exercises that I've used for myself. That you feel it instantly. You feel that instant. I call it like drops of magic, because you feel like that fairy dust beginning to awaken within yourself. And it's these really nature herbs. There's herbs. Mother gives us. She creates our own medicine for ourselves. Ashwagandha, St. John's wort. There's herbs that can be utilized. You can use even food. The type of foods that you eat. That can help you as well. Journaling, I really encourage journaling and story writing, because not only are you just expressing how you feel, you're directing where you want to go, and that in a sense that brings in the spirituality into the whole experience, because you're creating a prophecy of your own liberation, and you begin to move and shift that energy just through perspective. So yeah, those are just some of the tips that I would.
Amazing. You all have given such very I don't even know what word to call it. It's just I'm going to use your word, Naomi, a diverse range of strategies that anyone can use. And I feel that a lot of what you have referred to, I believe, Vanessa, you said it in the beginning around going back to like indigenous healing and different aspects that we can understand there. And I was looking at some research, and it explains that people from ethnic communities are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to than white people to have more major chronic diseases. And I want to kind of ask you, how do you feel that we can use a lot of these indigenous healing practices for those specific chronic illnesses that we experience as communities, whether it is chronic physical health or chronic mental health or chronic emotional distress as well? I'll throw this back up to you, Vanessa, because I know that this was something that you mentioned at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, so I think that by focusing on these ancestral spiritual practices, so what people need to recognize is that this isn't new age. These things have been in place for like millennia. They are proven. It's only, I guess modern medicine has just fairly recently started to recognize the value of this. But to me, they're just such an accessible tool to deliver culturally competent care. And I think that's what a lot of us are missing right now. And that's what prevents a lot of us from seeking help, is that we know if and when we do, we're not going to get culturally competent care. I've seen so many, I've had my own experiences. I've heard of so many stories of where this happens. Like I had to see this psychotherapist once, and the way in which I was treated triggered me and threw me back into a downward spiral for weeks after that, because this person didn't have, I don't think they should have been talking to anybody, but they didn't have the sensitivities that are needed to respond in an empathetic and caring way to what I was divulging to them, these like deeply held stories and stuff like that. And so with various spiritual practices really center emotional expression and whatever form that takes. So I'm a huge fan of saying, like, you don't have to talk about your trauma to heal. You don't have to talk about the event itself. If that makes you uncomfortable, because sometimes that re-traumatizes people, but we must process the feelings and thoughts behind the event. And there are so many ancestral practices that encourage that provide these outlets of release and expression that are just a lot more suited to people, whether it be from African backgrounds or other BIPOC backgrounds, that I think would just afford more inclusive environments too. And just give another option for people to access something that we're all born with. It's something that's innate with us. And with practice, we can tap into it. And so that's why I'm like a huge proponent of making spiritual care part of healthcare.
Yeah, we was talking about that before, around making sure that the assessments for spiritual care are in parallel to mental health care. And I agree that it's just needed. And I think there's scope for changing things up with these whole integrative frameworks. Well, the revisions that we're having over here in the UK, and there is scope to have more integrative practices. So yeah, thank you for that, Vanessa. Marcia, I'll throw the question back out to you in regards to what type of indigenous practices can we do as a people to support our healing through chronic illnesses?
I don't know, unless you're like Vanessa, that actually we have enough information for any of us from an African background to be able to tap into that easily. Let's face it, slavery and colonialization meant that we have been cut off from that knowledge. You know, it's well documented. You know, everything from our background has been cut off. Our identity has been reshaped, and therefore that knowledge that was handed down verbally, orally, through songs and things like that, we have not had access to. So that means that as people, we have to be really intentional in trying to seek this information out because it's hidden. So that's the first thing, and that in itself creates a barrier to be able to tap into that or that information as well. And from a business point of view, let's face it, unless there is some remuneration, some financial benefit to the medical profession, they aren't interested until they can use it to their advantage. So it doesn't become about the treating the people, it becomes about what they benefit from it. And that's why, in my cynical view, I believe that now the medical profession have woken up to some of those practices and herbs and all the rest of it that have been long held, because they suddenly think, another way of making money, as opposed to what is right for the people that we are treating. So I think there are some challenges, but I do think that we have to find our own sources of what works for us. We can't sit back any longer and accept the tablets or some of the treatment. You can try it, but if it doesn't work once, then I think instinctively we know this isn't right for us, but we go along with it because that's all that is available. And I think we should explore a bit more, and actually that exploration might really help us, because especially if it's a spiritual aspect, if it's about identity. And I think there's a lot of it for Black people. There's a lot of identity trauma that's carried down and remains in us and manifests itself in some of the illnesses that we see today, particularly when it comes to mental health.
I think when looking at how to support someone's healing journey, healing process, I know when preparing for the show we all spoke a bit about how to incorporate this into a treatment plan. So I'm going to throw this out to you, Naomi. How best do you think health professionals can incorporate spirituality into someone's treatment plan?
I think more so and when you say incorporating, is it them doing the practices, or is it us, just so I can understand the framework we're working with?
However you think it should be done, if it should be done, even, let's just say you was given a document of a patient that has been experiencing a lot of spiritual disruption, a lot of emotional issues, and they're enduring some chronic physical pain. What type of treatment plan would you kind of look to build for them based on your experience and understanding?
So it's dependent on the stage the patient is at, whether what they're experiencing is acute or if they're experiencing mild symptoms, because that would determine the type of treatment that would be administered. Particularly with the spiritist movements that also cater for these spiritual emergency experiences. One option would be a spiritual cleanse, an energetic cleanse that would be introduced to help in just removing some of those external or internal influences that create the majority of the blockage, because that's what we're dealing with. We're actually dealing with the blockages of energies that are creating these these types of distresses. So that's what they would initially go through with someone who's going through mild symptoms. Someone who's going through quite severe symptoms and may be more resistant to some of the initial care that or options that would be administered. They would go through a process where they will be worked on remotely from a multidisciplinary, almost metaphysical multidisciplinary approach. So you'll have your energy healers, you'll have your intuitives, you'll have people from different areas that can support and get to the root of what is the influence. Is this an energetic attachment? Is this a possession? Is this what is actually going on? Is what's going on here, and how can we actually remedy it? But they'll have to do that from a more remote, more indigenous core kind of influence type approach. So in integrating this into healthcare, you would have to have people who come from these cultures, who understand these cultures and are not diminishing the cultures and even some of the teachings of the cultures to allow it to actually be effective. Because I mean, for a white doctor or psychiatrist to learn some of these practices and start administering them onto these patients would kind of be a bit like, okay, there's certain things you can learn that can be effective, but you need to have the people who understand how to work with these systems, because it's a system. It's not just something you read a book on and I know how to do this. It takes years of practice to master how to be able to deal with energy, or even then how to deal with someone in that particular type of state. So that type of training is not really administered in healthcare settings. And also with these types of approaches, they are mainly group supervised. They only do their work under group supervision. In the Western world, you go off and you do your thing, right? You might have your peer reviews and stuff, but it's you don't. There's less of the group approach that is often administered. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anyone else got anything to add to that? Marcia, Vanessa?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Naomi said. I think that the healthcare system, they need to be a lot more vocal about the limitations that they have. I feel there's been a really good campaign that has been waged where they're kind of presented as the know-it-alls, the end-all be-all. We're science, or backed by science and stuff. And I'm pro-science, just like Naomi is. Like, I'm, really, an analytical but spiritual person. But there's a lot that science cannot answer. There's a lot of questions that just haven't been answered. We don't know. There's more that we don't know than we know. And I think the healthcare system would do very well by being a little bit more upfront with that. I mean, I personally, I don't know how many times I've gone to a doctor for some sort of physical issue and walked away with no answer other than like, let's keep an eye on it. So I think that, they need to be a little bit more transparent and honest about the limitations of medical science, and which would therefore hopefully lead them to be a lot more curious about some of the things that fall more in the spiritual or metaphysical realm. I also think they need to have a reckoning of sorts. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the history of how we came to be at this point. from a spiritual perspective, physical or mental health perspective. But going back to what Marcia was mentioning, there has been an active campaign, to separate us from our spiritual selves, because it is known that when we are, highly aligned spiritually, that we are powerful, we are unstoppable. And so healthcare and that whole industry, they need to learn the history behind colonization and how it separated indigenous people from their spiritual beliefs, and how that then altered everything that happened since then. A lot of us don't have a positive view of religion because of that, because at one point in history, the religious authorities actually approved the decimation of indigenous cultures. They said, if you arrive to these lands and they are godless or not Christian, you can take over that land and do whatever you want with the people. That was based on religion. Religion authorized and sanctioned that. Then replaced our own spiritual beliefs with harmful religious beliefs, which also taught that like Black and brown people were inferior, and all of this, and like the patriarchy and all of this stuff that has really done a number to our society, to say the least. So healthcare needs to be more knowledgeable about the history of that too, and so that they can demonstrate sensitivity, so that when you are in a healthcare setting and they're like, oh yeah, we do have a spiritual care advisor or whatever, spiritual counselor, it's always like a priest or something like that, somebody who's religious, that they can actually step back and view it from a more holistic lens, that spirituality comes in all forms. No, we're not all monoliths, and they can be a lot more patient-centered that way. But the vibe that I get right now is that these people, these healthcare experts, they either are aware of the history and completely ignoring it, or they're completely ignorant of the history, and therefore they're not making well thought out decisions around how to center patient care.
That's interesting, because I remember the conversation that we was having before, and Naomi, you was talking a bit about the degree that you're doing, it being a form of non-dogmatic ministry. And I think it'll be important now to bring that into this conversation to better understand how these religious or these figures that would be referred to for chaplaincy services can seek alternatives rather than Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism. So come in on this question, Naomi, and just tell us a bit about what that looks like and how that can be incorporated into healthcare services.
So yes, there is a lot more humanist and non-religious ministers and ministry that is expanding, and so it's understanding that there isn't just the option of you having someone who only subscribes to these particular dogmatic beliefs, and this is important because and this is kind of like a side note, but it connects. But there was a article that I saw recently with regards to sexual health and how they're reframing addiction because of the religious disguise that's been surrounded around that. And so we often don't realize when we go, and a lot of it falls in through psychology as well. It's crazy when you actually unravel and see how deep religion's really meshed itself in so many different things. When we understand that there are alternatives, alternative perspectives that can have a more a less judgmental approach, because I feel like a lot of what religion does is judges it creates a judgment for your natural expression, like for example sex, just feeling emotions and not feeling like you can't even lash out, turn the other cheek. Hold on, like I'm a human being. I don't always want to turn my cheek. What type of thing is that? And so there are people like myself, metaphysicians, that just take themselves out of that box completely, and it creates a much more safer space for the individual to create their own experience rather than feel like they're having an experience that's being projected to them or for them. And I think that's really important, even when it comes to even letting people know end of life care and you know, funerals and undertakers and all of that kind of, and having not everyone's religious, so why do we have to be subjected to either having a Christian or any type of religious type of funeral? You know, or you know, I remember that really the first time I had an encounter of that is a few years ago when I went to a funeral, and I saw drums, I saw it was a Kemetic funeral, but I've never seen something like that before. I never saw someone who wasn't a pastor, the owner of a church, conducting a ceremony that I actually felt more connected with.
Yeah.
You know, I actually felt like this, it assisted the grieving process a lot better, because it really transcended. I mean, in Christianity, okay, you go to heaven, but in metaphysics, you can meet your loved one again. You can talk to them again. You don't have to wait until you die to meet them. You can have that experience right now. You know, when you're having a dream, you're connecting with that loved one on another realm. And so there's practitioners that understand this particular perspective, and it's going to support you on that. So yeah, the only problem is that, for example, in the UK, metaphysics is not a major topic. It's growing, you know. So there's not going to be many metaphysical ministers. There may be some non-religious ministers that will have the compassionate effect, but may not have the depth that some people may require in terms of the spiritual influence and, you know, that type of depth or whatever. But it's just understanding the different options that people have available to them.
That's interesting. Thank you. And I want to circle back to an earlier point that was made, and this is going to be thrown out to you, Marcia. But there was a comment that was made about transformational experiences, grief, and death are not always linked to end of life. And this is obviously off the back of what you've just mentioned, Naomi. But in what ways could we better understand chronic illnesses and linking them to these transformational experiences that we endure through a lens of spirituality?
Wow, you're asking some questions. I think, I've been reading a book called Tapestries of Grief by Laura Pusey. She's a connection on LinkedIn. And one of the things that struck me with what Laura wrote was, and something that Naomi tapped on, we have many different forms of grief throughout our lives. And actually, we don't acknowledge them.
Yeah.
We don't acknowledge them. We don't look at them. We don't deal with them. We just move on and move on and move on until collectively they then cause a trauma, because that's what they do. They cause a trauma.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're born, and then we go through various phases in our lives. And there can be some grief there. There can be some things there that we don't actually look at. And one of the phrases that now comes to me is about that my wife talked about was neglected house. Call it a neglected house or a neglected room. You can not deal with stuff. You stick them in the room that you board them up, and eventually you get a house full of all these things that you've boarded up, and suddenly all of a sudden you're confronted with them. And I know that's happened to me. And eventually I've learned this is not the way to deal with it, ignoring it and think it's not going to come back. And because you've got to deal with it. It doesn't leave you. It's still part of you. Wherever you go, you've still got it with you. So you need to deal with it. But we're not taught to do that. We're not, as children, we're told to, pull yourself together. It doesn't hurt that much, blah, blah, blah. It's not that bad. Well, actually, what's not bad for one person may be really traumatic for another. And we don't take that individual approach because we just go, I don't think it's bad. So, and that's what professionals do, don't they? They have a book, they have a glossary, they go, you've got this. Oh, it doesn't fit. Oh, that doesn't fit. Or it's minor. Well, actually, it might be major. Just the symptoms aren't manifesting themselves in a way that says this is a major issue. And I don't think they actually listen to the patients enough either to actually find out what's really going on. They listen enough. I call it, they listen to ask questions. They listen to respond, not necessarily listening to understand. Because actually, if you spoke to someone about their symptoms or what's going on with them, you might find out a lot more in terms of an holistic approach. But then, doctors are under a lot of pressure. They've got so many minutes with a patient. They just need to, almost a checklist. I've asked those questions. Do I prescribe something or do I refer them? It's easier to prescribe these days because waiting lists to get to see an expert along. So the first line of defense is to prescribe what they can, which might not suit that individual. And in terms of medication, we don't know what medication might work for one person, might not work for somebody else. And I've had medication. I've got high blood pressure. I've had medication also for depression. And one spaced me out awfully that I hated it. Another one worked, but it's a temporary fix. So, and we know what medication have done to individuals and how wrong, the impact has been, things like thalidomide, for example. That was morning sickness. That was pregnant women not feeling well. Look at the implications of that drug, and not just physically, but emotionally and mentally on these women that took something that they would now say, I wish I hadn't taken it because the result was. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, and I don't think the medical profession are necessarily that interested in alternative forms of healing someone and helping someone to recover. Essentially, we can self-heal in many aspects, but we're not taught those skills. We're not taught how to do it. We just don't. And I come back to my point. It's a business to give people drugs. It's a business to sell them. And we all know historically anyway, which I always find ironic, is that Black people have been used as in medical experiments, but yet we're not really written in medical books on how to do. They looked at us as guinea pigs for white people and to help white people's medical conditions. So they don't know how to help us because they've never looked at us as human beings to heal and help and heal. They haven't.
I want to just off the back of what Marcia said, and this is something I wanted to mention earlier as well, in terms of the benefits of Indigenous perspectives. They reframe the perspective to illness, because how the West still sees illness, Indigenous cultures do not see it that way. And a personal example is with myself. I have chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. Now, the doctors would tell me there's no cure for fibromyalgia, and you're just faced with having these generalized pains. Now, my pains are not just limited to my muscles. They're actually my nerves. I have very hypersensitive nerves, so I have my nerves flaring up and my muscles flaring up all the time. Now, No one could give me understanding of what that was. But I, as a gifted intuitive and someone who's clairsentient, I realize, and clairsentience is you being able to clear sense in your feelings, right? I feel when I get pain, I realize that that's not actually pain; it's actually a gift. It's messages. The and in fact, that's actually the perspective from indigenous cultures. Everything, whether it's anxiety, it's a message. Like it's a message that's trying to bring you back into this present moment and get you to think a little bit differently. So when I get pains, a lot of my, even when I'm doing a lot of my sessions with my clients, I feel their physical pains in my body. So I could get a backache, I could get a headache, I could get a heartache, and by those aches I know where the root of their issue is, and I can tap in and I can explore,
Right.
because what I'm picking up is their energetic uh field,
Discomfort.
right, and their discomfort within the field. So that's one of the things that we're able to get from indigenous practice. But what I linking into what Marcy was saying about the end of life and the death, what came to me is it's almost like, because when you think about the system and how it's been created, you go through school, you get to secondary school, college. Well, from secondary school, you're expected, when you're taking your GCSE, to know exactly who you're supposed to be, and you're held to that identity. You're held to that fixed identity, and there's no space for you to grow. So when you go through these identity crises, which are normal, and a lot of these identity crises come if we really break down some of the crises that happen to late 30s, late 20s, 30-year-olds, particularly because of the life experiences that they're going through, because the identity that they thought they were, they're now having to shed, they're now
Yeah.
having to remove, and they're now realizing life is now beginning because I've been sold a program. So the world doesn't support these life cycles and transitions because it's holding you to a fixed identity that you cannot move from, and then they demonize you for it when you start to express the discomfort and the distress of what that actually does to a person. So I just thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. And
I'd just
Vanessa?
like to add something to like what Naomi was saying, because like, our ancestors had the answers. We have the answers already. We just need to look back to what the knowledge was. So they had a much more, I think, extensive knowledge around what childhood development involved. And a lot of indigenous practices included celebrations, rites of passage,
Yes.
initiations at these various stages, because they know, right? They sat back and observed this over time, and they knew to accept it, and that these were, part of our cycles of lives. But again, as with the advent of like colonization and stuff, we became like, they created these cookie cutter guidelines. Like at 18, all of a sudden you're supposed to have like life figured out and all of this stuff. And there was no room for individual expression. If we all reflect on our childhood, from the time that you're born, everything is kind of controlled for you. Even mundane things, if you think back to when you're like in grade school or something, you don't have any autonomy over your bodily functions. You have to ask to go to the bathroom. You're told when to go to lunch. Yeah. And so each of those things, no matter how big or small, separates us from ourselves further and further, to the point where like, yeah, you're in your 30s and you're like, I don't know who I am, because everything that was me has been like squished out of me, my entire life, because I had to fit into these molds. Like when I was younger, I wanted to be like, I wanted to be a judge, and then I wanted to be like an artist and a photographer. But like, I ended up having to push that stuff down because I knew like these are not sustainable. One, I don't think I'll become a judge just because of the background that I grew up in and stuff. That just seemed like completely unrealistic. Photographers, unless you're like a highly successful one, you're not going to make money that way. Oh, guess I got to go enter into this workforce and stuff. So that was another aspect of me I had to suppress. And, we experienced that through our entire life. Whereas like indigenous cultures, they were more supportive of the unique individual qualities of each member of their group. I mean, they even had language for things that we're still just discussing, around like gender expression and trans and non-binary members, or what your sexual orientation is. They had language for that because they recognized that it exists, and they were accepting of it. So I think there's a lot that, we don't have to start from scratch. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to reconnect to the knowledge and wisdom that our ancestors had around these sorts of things, and embrace them more. And I know that, yes, there are accessibility issues, right? Not everybody has the knowledge of like, what is my lineage? That's a whole nother, thing too, that's been taken from us, especially the African diaspora across the world. But I encourage people to start somewhere, somewhere, get a general sense. And then, there's a lot of commonalities in these indigenous cultures too, around child rearing and stuff, no matter where they were in the world. There are just some core tenets of respecting children as full functioning human beings that really wasn't like fostered. I think, especially when I was being raised, it was children are to be seen, not heard, and, listen to adults and things of that nature. So I guess I say all of that to say is that we have a lot of answers to these questions already. We just need to return to the ways of the ancestors and access that knowledge and wisdom. And I agree that they are present with us, because if you believe in science, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred or transformed. So they are with us in some form or fashion. We can still connect to them. We still do have access to their wisdom and knowledge.
Thank you for that, and apologies for my disappearance.
Oh, no, I thought I did notice you were gone, but I was like, I'll keep talking.
I appreciate that. The internet gremlins are trying to get me today, but we move. So thank you. I missed the tail end of that, but I will obviously watch the replay and catch the tail end of what you said. But thank you for that, Vanessa. Well, ladies, I'm gonna kind of round off here, but I want you all to provide everyone that is watching, listening, wherever they are going to watch and listen to this. Just tell us a bit about what's coming up for you and where they can find you. And this is going to go to Marcia first.
Where can you find me? You can find me on my website, Marcia Orr Consultancy. You can find me on Twitter at Marcia Orr 62. I've got a few projects coming up and some speaking engagements. And in terms of linking to this aspect of self, and something I've been toying with a while, I decided to have do my DNA in terms of my ancestry, and actually isolate actually where my African roots are. I know they're quite diverse, but actually pinpoint that down round and start doing some work and discovery of self, because my history is me, and I don't know my history, and that's really important. So that's what I'm going to be up to over the next few months.
Lovely. I hope you share with us your discoveries along the way. Thank you for that. Naomi, what's coming up for you, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I have some new programs and workshops that I'm going to be releasing. My Mindset Mastery program, I have a part 2 that I'm releasing to that, which is a program for subconscious programming, affirmative meditation, and mindset reprogramming, mindset work. I'm tired this time. And also, I'll be releasing a program, Shadow Work for Practitioners, to allow them to go through their own processing. You know, a lot of people are taking on all of these traumas from patients and stuff, and we're not taking the time to really process our own. So I'm going to be doing a lot of work surrounding and the support of practitioners in our own healing journeys and our own empowering and transformational processes. Where can you find me? You can find me on my websites, houseofphoenix.co.uk or phoenixpriestess.co.uk, Instagram, Phoenix Priestess 888, or LinkedIn, Naomi Nams Elliott. Just type in my name, Naomi Nams Elliott, I will pop up, and I'll be everywhere. So thank you so much.
Amazing. And there is a lot of work around vicarious trauma that I'm seeing coming out. So this is perfect timing for it, because people seem to be living vicariously more around the depressive side of things, but not understanding how you can live vicariously through supporting yourself out of a situation, vicarious hope, vicarious trust even. But yeah, Vanessa, yourself, what's coming up for you, and what are you doing next, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna continue to do my spiritual counseling and energy therapy work through my service called Espirito Libre, which is free spirit. So I offer one-on-one sessions as well as group sessions. I do online healing circles, workshops. I'm working on a self-paced online course right now that's really exploring how do you heal from racism. Um, and I also am doing a lot of work with my local community to cultivate spaces for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are experiencing racism or race-based trauma to come and seek peer counseling, to learn more about ancestral spiritual practices, and really to just feel a sense of acceptance and belonging. So I actually live in the northeastern part of the United States known as New England. And it is a very predominantly white area of the country. And there's a lot of trauma that comes with that, living in predominantly white spaces. And so I feel called to help people who have had similar experiences to me and create places where we can come together and heal without being re-traumatized. So that's one of the projects I'm working on. And then I'm also working on creating a professional association for healers in this area of the United States, because there are so few of us. It's very hard to find culturally competent care. So I want to make that easier for people by creating a network of professionals, a variety healing modalities, but also creating opportunities for people who are interested in joining these fields to have mentorship and training, opportunities there. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm just continuing my own, healing journey, similar to Marcia. I've been doing a lot of research into my ancestry. We were able to get a little bit of additional information earlier this year through DNA testing by a Black-owned company that has a rather large database of, information around African ancestry. And so I was able to finally pinpoint where my ancestors on my paternal side resided, which is modern day Gabon, and then also the 3 ethnic groups that they belong to. And so I'm doing research around their spiritual practice, which is Bwiti. And I'm at a point where I think now I have to return home in order to get more information, because there's just not a lot out there. And I feel this calling to return there and reconnect with, my ancestral roots. And the next step will be the maternal side. So we have that other half of the equation.
A lot of research. I love it. I love it. I love it. And it's all about practicing what you preach, and viewers, if you're listening, and I hope you are listening, all what I'm hearing is that returning home, returning to self is the main thing of overcoming emotional disruptions, overcoming poor mental health, overcoming chronic illnesses, is understanding what works for you, how you can heal self, and seeking the necessary tools and resources in order for you to be able to do that if you're not very sure on how to do it yourself. So thank you, each and every one of you. You've been, again, invaluable and given us a lot of gems. Make sure you rewind, watch from the beginning, have your notebook, and just grab all of these gems that these beautiful ladies have dropped. So this is it from us for now. This is Rihanna from Black Mental Health Matters with Vanessa, Marcia, and Naomi, talking about how you can heal from the emotional and spiritual aspects of chronic ill health and mental health. So take care, have a great day, and stay blessed. I'm going to end this now.